everybody handouts. This is always the awkward part. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground today, not necessarily on a basic level, but not too complicated. But my goal today is to get you to reevaluate what your definition of soil is and your priorities in growing anything that you want. I forgot one thing really quick. Okay. So ideally, the soil is the most important thing when it comes to growing anything. And in my experience from the 20 some odd years that I've been doing this, it's the one thing that people put the least attention to, because people don't understand that soil is an actual living thing. It's its own like ecosystem. It's like looking outside the window and seeing life happening in front of you. The same thing's happening in the ground, and there's, essentially microscopic little people down there, that are microorganisms that are keeping our soil alive, keeping our plants flourishing, and actually making our soil healthy with nutrients abundantly available. And there's this idea that, you can find any kind of soil you imagine. I'm going to show you a bunch of different kinds today, and they're all different textures, they're all different moisture contents, different ingredients. They all have different purposes, and when it really comes down to it, there's no such thing as bad soil. It's about what makes it up, and we can make any kind of soil become great soil if we understand the fundamentals about what go into it. And that's kind of my goal today, is to really talk about what goes into a good soil. We're going to evaluate components. We're going to talk a little bit about microbes. We're going to talk about types of soil that you might go out and purchase, why some are better than others, and what their purposes are. Because I think you need to have a clear understanding what each one is and what its purpose is, so you can actually use it to its right potential. And then we'll just kind of recap at the end of all the core components of what we need to be successful. So if you have questions along the way, please stop me, ask me. You can wait till the end. I don't care. There's no real format here. So as I mentioned, soil is a living ecosystem made of many components. And without all those components, then we can't have healthy soil. So we need a good, balanced system. And so we look at what soil is made of. It's made up of minerals, things that we find on the periodic chart. We have organic matter, so things that are breaking down, which could be mulch, it could be leaves, it can be twigs, trees, large logs. It all contributes to soil in the long run. Even things that are like rocks, for instance. Rocks are weathered and they're broken down by water over time, and they turn into sediment, and those sediments then contribute to soil. So everything that is organic eventually does become soil at some form or another over however long it takes to break down. Water, we have to have moisture in soil in order for it to stay viable and alive. If it dries up, then it cracks, then it becomes nutrient deficient, and then nothing is able to survive in it. You look at like the desert, everything, only like very, very adapted plants survive in the desert, and then when they get the one rain they get, it's a ton of water, and then everything flourishes for a long period of time until it dries back out, and then the cycle starts over again. And that's because water plays an important part for nutrients and microbes to be able to survive, and for also things to break down and create that cycle. We need air. The soil needs air. If you dig in the ground here, it's primarily clay. It's compacted. Oxygen doesn't get in there, and that's one of the reasons why it becomes compacted. If oxygen can't move through it, then water also can't move through it very easily, and then it just creates an environment that's not going to be able to support microbial life, and it's not going to be able to support really good plant life over time. So ideally what we're looking at, we need a balance of these things. That's why we're gonna, when we start looking at like our blended mixes that you can buy out there, you'll start seeing how each one has different properties and how that mix plays to its usage because of these elements here. Does that make sense? All right. To follow along the handout because this is a brand new presentation that I redid last night, so I'm still getting my footing here. So in order to understand soil, we need to understand what makes up soil as far as particles go. Probably all of us at one point in time way back in our school days learned this in science, and everybody forgets it. But you kind of have like the triangle of all the different particles that can make up soil and such. But ideally, at each end of the triangle, you have three main categories. You have sand, silt, and clay. So in order to understand how a soil can hold water and moisture, we have to understand particles first. So sand we think of as this fine mixture, but really sand is the largest of all the particles that we deal with when we come into soil. It's gritty, it's kind of hard, and if you look under a microscope, then you're going to have all these like gaps, large gaps in between these particles because they're larger. I don't have my whiteboard out here today to draw on, but if I drew a bunch of big circles, the gaps in between those are going to be much larger. So when you have large gaps in between particles, what's going to happen with air and water? It's going to go right through it. So sand, while it's valuable for air, not so good for holding moisture. So when we think about how many things really like to grow in really sandy soil, not a lot of stuff. It has to be adapted to it. But as gardeners and landscaping or just general purpose things that we do at home, not going to be ideal for almost everything that we grow. Silt. Silt is going to be a medium particle size. It's going to be smoother, less gritty. It's going to hold some moisture because it has smaller gaps. But it also can begin, it's where the stage of compaction begins. It holds moisture. If it holds or gets excessive moisture, then it begins to compress down, and then you don't get oxygen going through there. So while now we have moisture that stays, now we're reaching the level of compaction, which doesn't allow air. And then lastly, we have what we're the most familiar with in Southeast Texas is clay. Gumbo clay, you dig. Anytime after a rain, you can dig down, while it's dry to walk on the top, but you put your shovel in the ground, you come up, and it's damp, it's sticky. It holds moisture the longest. Very poor drainage, but very nutrient dense because it holds that moisture and it doesn't flow through freely. Nutrients can't escape. And that's so when we go to the other end of the spectrum on sand, nutrients are going to fly through it. It's going to be very hard to keep minerals, vitamins, fertilizer in a sandy soil because, again, just like the water, washes it out of the root zone. So just like our composition of minerals and air and water, we need a good composition of these three particle sizes to ideally make a good soil. So what we're looking for, this has always been the case, everybody says, you're looking for a sandy loam. And by sandy loam, they mean roughly around 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. We're not going to be able to get out there and measure the particle sizes and get close to this, but by what they mean, they want something that is going to hold moisture, allow excess moisture to go through, have a crumbly texture, and be able to hold nutrients. So we're looking for a little bit of everything. If we have a good mixture of these things and we have a sandy loam texture, then we are going to be able to support what we call the soil food web. The soil food web is kind of like That's like the equivalent of us on the top of the ground, us and animals. It's our population of microbes and what we'll call like small animals, like microscopic things, like arthropods and protozoas. And then you have earthworms, which we can actually see, which play a vital role in soil health. So in order for soil to be healthy, we need bacteria and fungi. If we really think about those, when we think about bacteria and fungi, what do we think of as people? Sick, bad. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that leads us to, as gardeners, that those connotations of bacteria and fungi, because they're not necessarily good for us. Like we don't think about like good bacteria in our gut. We don't think about all those things that we can't see that actually are vital to our health. The same thing applies for soil health. We have to have good bacteria. We have to have good fungi in order for soil to be healthy. The best example I can give to you of this is in creating healthy soil, we need to consider everything we're doing, and we're essentially being stewards of the soil, and we're trying to mimic what's happening in nature. So if you've ever been camping, gone out to the woods, been in the middle of nowhere, there's no one out there watering the soil and the plants, there's no one out there fertilizing, there's no one out there making a compost pile. All these things are happening naturally. And how that happens, how we get compost, how we get nutrients, how we get nitrogen for growth and for decomposition, all comes from this soil food web. We get leaves and things that are ending their life, falling down, creating mulch layers that hold moisture, that are perfect environments for fungi and bacteria to break things down. Then they reintroduce those as nutrients to the soil. So when you think about that, there's no one out there doing that. So this is what we're trying to accomplish as home gardeners. And I don't tell you that to overcomplicate it. It's to put it out there that we don't need to do a lot of really complicated things to make this happen. We just need to be very mindful about what we put in and be consistent. We'll talk a little bit about what these key soil microorganisms do and what each of their parts are. So bacteria is really important, and bacteria is what we primarily need in order to decompose organic matter. So leaves that fall on the ground, or things that like all the carbons and brown things that we put into our compost pile, bacteria are what help us break that down over time. They're going to help convert nutrients into plant available forms. You can have nutrients in the soil, but that doesn't mean it's in an available form that a plant can actually use. And that's where microbes come in. So a good example here, we have like fertilizer. And a good organic fertilizer, can your plant use this just like it is right now? No way. That's like trying to get a plant to absorb a brick. It's just not going to happen. So we're relying on these bacteria and this fungi to make these into plant available nutrients. We want them in a form like this because we want them to be consistently available and slowly available over a long period of time. Plants and soil, they don't want a bunch of something all at once. So if we're using quick release fertilizers and nutrients, that's like going to the buffet and just eating all the garbage and not actually having a well-balanced meal. You're not getting what you actually need to be healthy. The fungi's main objective is to help plants also break down organic matter. It's there to improve soil structure, and it's also there to transport nutrients. The most common fungi that people may be familiar with is mycorrhizal fungi. The mycorrhiza is the most well-known. There's many, many species, and mycorrhiza, we'll skip backwards here, so if we have this plant here, and let's say this plant is in search of some nutrients, but it's not in that root zone that you see up on the picture there. Well, maybe there's some minerals or nutrients outside of that in the root zone. So mycorrhizal fungi will bind to the root tips of this plant. And then what will happen, it'll reach out and it'll grab iron, boron, whatever nutrient this plant might need or is looking for, and then it's going to pass it on to the plant through the root system, and then your plant is going to trade sugars. So they live symbiotically, And it's just like us going to the grocery store. We make a trade. We pay cash for food. So we're trading things, and that's how mycorrhizal fungi works. So it helps your plant be able to get more nutrients, water, resources more readily available. It's also fungi. If anybody's ever had like a tree in their yard that they've cut down, and years, it can happen 5-10 years later, you always find these hard nodules that grow on top of the grass or the yard, and that's all fungi that is breaking down those root systems inside the soil, because it was once woody tissue and it's dying. So it doesn't just sit there. Microbes work it and they break it down, and then it becomes compost soil and so on. Actinomycetes, they help decompose woody material, very much like other microbes. They also help improve decomposition of woody plant material specifically. They're also going to break down complex organic materials, and they produce natural antibiotics that can help suppress harmful microbes. So they're kind of like a regulator in the soil. They are responsible for that kind of like, if you have good soil in your garden and you go out after a really good rain and you get that really like earthy smell that wasn't there before, that comes from microbes. These are also really important for late stages of composting. So they help break down compost as well if you're making your own compost pile. Nematodes are essentially microscopic little roundworms. Roundworms are, like most things, people are familiar with roundworms from pets and animals. They can be parasitic to animals, some types, but a nematode is a microscopic roundworm, and it's found in almost all soil. All of them are beneficial, but in the world of gardening, they get a bad rap like fungi and bacteria, because there are certain plants that we commonly grow as gardeners, like tomatoes, that are susceptible to what we call a root knot nematode. And they'll cause these little knotty nodules on the roots systems of certain plants that are susceptible to it, and it prevents proper growth, nutrient and water uptake, and it can really stunt a plant, and it could kill it over time. There's ways that you can benefit that or prevent that with some practices we'll talk a little bit about later on. But beneficial nematodes, they feed on bacteria and fungi. But wait, we need bacteria and fungi. We also need checks and balances. If you let one thing get overpopulated and there's not enough resources, what happens? It's kind of like us. If we run out of food, what happens to humans? We start dying. Yeah, so we have to have these checks and balances. So nematodes, they help regulate microbe populations. They help release nutrients back into the soil. They also can help cycle nitrogen. If you do get parasitic root knot nematodes, that's why again, you can get the stunted root damage, or just like a plant that does not look vigorous. Tomatoes are the one thing that we see this in most commonly, but it's not crazy common. And that's where when you're growing plants, like that's where hybridization can be helpful, because there are plant species that are resistant against root knot nematodes. So if it's something that you do have, you can find varieties that will support your particular problems in the soil, so that you don't have those cultivating and you're working to get rid of them naturally. There's treatments for root knot nematodes, but when you put those down, they don't know the difference between a good nematode and a bad nematode. And when most things are beneficial and there's less bad, then we're disrupting our soil ecosystem, and we're getting rid of the checks and balances that we need and allowing other things to become more prominent. Protozoas, single-celled organisms, they help us regulate bacteria in the soil. They also help us release nitrogen when they consume bacteria, and they help contain a microbial balance. So again, they're just a check and balance that we have in the soil. Soil animals, arthropods, those are just like tiny insects, and they can help break down organic matter. And how that benefits is if we have small insects that are out there that are helping break down organic matter, that's helping the microbes, so they're speeding up the process. So these insects can help break down compost faster. So it's good to have decomposition insects available and support those in your environment, and we can do that by being pesticide free if we can. Lastly, we have earthworms. There's always the old idea that if you have earthworms in the soil, you have healthy soil, and that it is a good sign. But a mass population of them is good, nice fat earthworms, and they bring to the table something that is far more beneficial than some of the other things. They bring aeration. As we mentioned, that fine balance between water and oxygen. So a worm that's constantly tunneling through our soil, creating oxygen tunnels, and then they add nutrients. Worm castings is a better term than worm poop, but it's one of the most valuable resources, and they're expensive if you have to buy them. Some people do buy them, but if you keeping earthworms cultivated and having them, or if you don't have a lot of them, introducing good composting worms into your soil can be helpful, because you're going to get that aeration and you're going to get free nutrients being put back into there. They're nutrient cyclers. Any questions so far? All right. Now keep trucking. So when we're looking for these mixtures of minerals and air and moisture and such, and levels of different particle sizes, how do we know that? We're not going to get it out and stare at it in a microscope or anything, but I tell you these things because you need to understand the core components to really, when you pick up a soil or you look at your own soil, you're going to have a good idea of where you are. The first thing that we want to look at with any soil, whether it's existing or we're purchasing, is what's the texture like? Can I pick up my raised bed or my potted soil? Can I grab it, get a big handful, squeeze it together, and then see how it falls apart? Just by observation, I can tell a lot about it. If it crumbles apart really, really, really quickly, it's probably kind of like a sandy texture. It's not going to hold a lot of nutrients, not going to hold a lot of moisture. If I squeeze it together on the opposite end and it just sticks together, or it clumps into a ball and it doesn't fall apart, then I'm going to probably hold too much moisture. Nutrients will probably be readily available, but they're not going to move through the soil very easily. So I'm kind of looking for something in the middle. I want something that's crumbly. It can stick together a little bit, but I want it to slowly break apart when I let it go out of my hands. I would do that in here, but I'll make a giant mess. If we have good crumbly soil, then it's going to support the first thing on the top of the list, and that's good drainage. So we need moisture to stay in our soil, but we want excess moisture to move through. Most of the time, water is heavier than soil. If a gallon of water weighs 8 pounds, gravity is going to pull moisture and the heaviest thing down. So it's going to move through the soil. So if we have a lot of excess moisture, it's got to go down, so we need a way for it to escape. Your soil particles and different components are going to help absorb that moisture and swell up. And I'll let you guys touch some of these soils, and you'll see some of the ones that are holding moisture. And it hasn't rained in a good minute, and all this stuff has been sitting outside in the bag. I opened up most of these today. Only one of them came from a closed container. That's the seed starting mix. But you can see the moisture holding capabilities and how it drains well just by filling it. You can also tell a lot about your soil by just looking at the color. So a good living soil that is probably nutrient dense, holds moisture appropriate, is going to have a very rich dark color. I have an example of here that does not have a lot of color, and that's because it's by nature not something that holds hardly any nutrients. And you can see it's very light. Doesn't look like it's alive, just looks like garbage. Looks like what we would call dirt. Smell the dirt. I mean, it all smells like something, but something that's very rich, that kind of has not a foul odor to it, but just smells very earthy when it's wet. Is a good indication that you have a good mixture of soil. So there's all these things that we can do by sense to really tell how our soil that we already have is working. Lastly, which we can't, ideally if we have these top 4 things, we have the right structure to support an active soil that is full of microbes. But if we're unsure if we have microbes, we do have the ability to inoculate our soil or add microbes in there. But we don't want to do so if we don't have the right soil structure. If I went and I took this guy right here, which is basically a granulated microbe, so there's billions of microbes in this jug. But if I put that out there into the yard and the clay soil I have, and I don't feed these microbes immediately, they are not going to survive. But if I have good soil structure that's crumbly, holds moisture, air, I still want to have something for them to feed on, but it's less important. They're going to find some of these things in the soil that can help sustain them. So soil composition plays a big role into whether microbes can stay abundant to the level that we want them. So the next thing when it comes to having good soil, we have to, if we have a good texture, we have the right components, we want it to be nutrient rich. So if we know we have the right texture, we know we can hold nutrients, but we need to consider what type of nutrients. I'm always going to talk to you about using slow release natural ingredients. I'm not a major environmentalist, of any sort, but organic slow release sources are going to support good soil health. It's going to support good microbial life and the ecosystem that we're shooting for. But if we're going to add fertilizer to our soil, we have to have an idea where we start. Having done this for so long and seeing like my grandfather's generation, the old time generation, where they bought the same thing every year, they did the same thing over and over again, and while it worked in a general sense, their soil never got any better. It was always the same because they were putting oftentimes maybe the wrong things, too much of one thing, not enough of another, or maybe they just didn't have the right pH. So I encourage you, no matter how big or small, if you're growing, to at minimum get a home soil test kit and test your soil. If anything, for pH, because pH determines whether nutrients are available for a plant to absorb it. So if we have most things that we're growing as a home gardener, or if we're just doing like landscaping, most things want a slightly acidic to neutral pH, so 6 to 7 in the range of 0 to like 14. So we're trying to be right about in the middle. But if we're not in that range, we can supply all the nutrients we want in the soil. Our soil could be abundantly rich, but it's like a plant trying to absorb these dry pellets or like a brick. It can't use nutrients if the pH is not right. So it's really important to check this. At the same time, most soil test kits are going to tell you a good amount about your macronutrients, which are what you're going to find, just the 3 numbers on every fertilizer in existence. But these are a minor part. They are the most important because these are what plants need to, this is the equivalent of us eating food every day. If we don't have food, we don't survive. But we still need minerals, vitamins, hormones, nutrients to regulate our health. So, but if we put too much of one of these things in there, put too much nitrogen, we can burn our plants up. If we put too much nitrogen and we don't necessarily need it in the soil, we might cause our plant to never flower or fruit. It might just grow, but never put on what we're shooting for. On the other end, our native soil out here, most of the time has more phosphorus than we need. A lot of people are pumping phosphorus-rich fertilizers into the soil, the native soil, and that can actually bind up other nutrients. So we have an abundance of one thing, and now we've made it to where our plant can't get the other things that it might need. So there's a fine balance again. So a soil test is an easy way where we can determine what our macronutrients are and whether or not our pH is right to be able to utilize all these other minor things that are needed. So on the other end of things, we can assess soil that we already have, but what if we need to amend or we need to get soil for something new? This could be from a potted plant, this could be from growing a garden, it doesn't really matter. Well, we have to have a clear understanding of what different soils are for. As I can tell you, as long as I've been doing this, like 50% of people don't know the difference between potting mix and garden soil. You know, they're not out there just to design and get you to buy different things. They have their suitable purposes. And at the end of the day, we could amend any soil to make it suitable for any use by understanding some of the principles we've already talked about. But ideally, you have several categories out there. You have potting mix. Potting mix is typically going to have the most diverse group of ingredients in it. It's, you know, a lot of times it's going to have compost. It's going to have aged forest products, which are going to be like broken down trees and leaves and things like that. Could be aged pine bark. So these are things, organic matter that's supporting life in your soil. But it's going to have a lot of things in it to help improve drainage, because we're putting it into a contained environment where we need moisture to hold, because we got to have drainage in containers. But if we don't hold enough moisture, then our plants are going to dry out, they're going to stress. And if we have to water too much, then in a container, if we have to water a bunch, where do nutrients go? Out the bottom. So then we have to feed more. So having a soil that is well suited for holding nutrients, holding moisture, but allowing excessive inputs to drain through is really important. So potting soil is important, and not all potting soils are created equal. I always encourage people when they are buying potting soils, like, to look at the ingredients, understand what some of these ingredients can do. I'm thinking here, I'm not going to go crazy deep into it, but I gave you some breakdowns of some of the ingredients in there. Like, for instance, peat versus coco coir. Peat moss has been around forever, but peat moss is highly unsustainable. It has to be grown on a bog. It's very disruptive. Eventually peat moss won't, it won't be around. On the other hand, you can substitute coco coir or coconut husk. Coconut husks are infinitely renewable, very easy to grow. Coconuts are used, and there's waste from coconuts all over the place, because you find coconut everything nowadays. But it provides you some of the same properties. But why might you care about one or the other? Peat moss, in a climate like we have where it's extremely hot and we get a lot of really dry weather, peat moss, if it dries out, it becomes hydrophobic. And that means that it no longer wants to accept water. Well, we need water for our plants to survive, right? And I always tell people this: if you've gone and you bought a plant somewhere and you pull it out of the pot and it's all crusty on top and really hard, and you're having to break it off, and it's just really, really dry, or you keep it in the pot for a while and you water it and it doesn't ever seem, no matter how much water you give it, it gets droopy by the next day. It's because the soil most likely has a lot of peat in it, and it's become hydrophobic. And you would have to soak that soil in water to get it to break that cycle and to swell up to where when you water, it actually gets all the way through the soil. Now, coconut coir, on the other hand, it will never reject water. It'll give you a lot of the same properties of peat moss, but you'll always have that good drainage, and you'll always have moisture holding capability. You'll see a lot of soils are going to coconut coir, and potting soils, even some garden soils that use peat moss will have it in there. So it's a good alternative. I'll pass this around. This is a composted coco coir. So you can see the stringy parts like you would find if you've ever seen a coconut. It's got the hairy outer part. They take and they desalinize the husks, they process them, and then this particular one, they compost it down so that it becomes nutrient rich, microbially rich. But if you feel this came out of a bag that hadn't been rained on and I don't know when, but moisture still in here. If I let a bag of peat moss sit like this, it'll be dry, dry, dry. So I'll pass that around. If you don't want to get your hands dirty, cool. So when you're looking at like ingredients in potting mix, that's a good component that I like to look for, because it makes me more successful. A coco coir based soil, most likely I can leave it with nothing in it in the direct sun, and I might get mild clumping, but I can still break that clump apart into fine soil, and I usually can reach my hand all the way down to the bottom of the container, working my way down. Whereas peat moss, I might not be able to dig in there very easily. So it helps keep the soil structure more to what we like. Another thing that you'll find in here, there's always, if you're trying to increase drainage, and that's found in potting mixes, is perlite or vermiculite. Expanded shell is a good substitute that I always talk about. Expanded shell doesn't break down like vermiculite or perlite. Great alternative for helping with drainage, creating good soil structure, and a lot of good potting soils now, or even cactus mix, will have expanded shell in there. So, raised bed mix is going to kind of be in the middle. It's going to have a little bit of drainage amendment because essentially a raised bed is a giant pot, but oftentimes we have access to the native soil underneath. So microbes and earthworms and things may have access to this fresh, good soil that we have. But we need good drainage, but we don't need all the fancy things like vermiculite and perlite in our raised bed mix. Garden soil is going to have some bigger textures to it. It's going to have some maybe chunky organic matter in it, and that's okay. We're using garden soil to amend existing soil, or a good, nice garden soil might be able to be put in a raised bed altogether with nothing. This one here, this one's dry because it's been sitting inside here for a long while. But you can see in here, this has some bark material in it, and that's okay. It's going to help create soil structure, drainage. This has a little bit of like organic compost in it, aged pine bark or forest products. So it's just nothing but basically a stage of compost. And all these fines once looked like the bigger pieces in here. So it shows you that everything in here is going to break down over time. So this is something that I could use to, I could use this to fill a raised bed. I can even use that in a pot if I really want to, because the ingredient structure is pretty good. It doesn't hold too much excessive moisture. Now topsoil often gets used in gardening.
What's that again? I'm sorry.
That's the Gardener's Magic product that I sell a lot of.
Oh, okay.
It's
this
like,
one is?
yep, that one's that's not a really great sample. It's actually usually a little bit finer than that, but I find whatever torn bags I can find when I take these samples. And your topsoil, on the other hand, this is the one I mentioned earlier about like looking at something that is pale in color, and topsoil doesn't hold a lot of nutrients. It's not really great for throwing in a garden. While it has a fine texture to it, and it'll hold some moisture, but if you really look at the color of this, it's very, very dull. It looks like what I would call dirt. When I go out, like if I have like a trodden area outside where like in the yard where people are driving over, or like maybe my guys are walking over, this is what the dirt looks like to me when it's just being trafficked down. It doesn't support a lot of great plant growth, and I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place in gardening, but I would not put this into my raised bed garden or into my garden without understanding that I need to really amend this to make it into something that is good for plants.
So what you're saying is that'd be a good idea when your dogs are digging holes under the
Yeah,
fence. Put
that's about like
to refill the hole.
filling areas is what topsoil is really good for. I mean, it came from the top. You put it back on the top, but it's not nutrient dense, so it's not really doing a whole lot for us when we're talking about plant health and soil health. It has its place, but when we're planting plants, we need something that's nutrient dense and has everything, and that does not have it. Compost is important. All soil, starts off as something. Like this here is leaf mold compost. So this is basically just leaves and then some kind of like decaying material. It could be like food scraps that went in here with this to help build up nitrogen content. And this essentially is some of the best compost that you can get. It's very fine. If you fill it, it holds moisture a little bit. It's damp. This is the primary ingredient in like our house brand of like our high-end potting mix. Compost. It doesn't have to be some fancy thing. So leaf mold compost takes a long time. It's some of the best compost that you can create. That's what's going to help feed your microbes. This is going to help release some of these nutrients back into the soil. And this is how you can top dress existing soils that you have by layering in compost. At least once or twice a year if you're doing raised beds, pots. You don't need to put more soil in there. You can layer in compost, and that's going to keep that soil that's in there below it active and living as these nutrients draw their way down with moisture, and then you're going to keep your existing soils healthier long term. This potting mix here is like our good potting mix. It's going to have a little bit of the expanded shell in it. It's got a little bit of perlite in here. It's got compost. It's got the composted coco coir in it. You got leaf mold, coco coir. You got some sand in here for drainage. So it's a little bit of everything. This to me is like ideally what I'm shooting for when I'm looking for good soil. This is like my go-to example, you know. But if we don't have that, that's okay. You know, you have a basis to know where you're headed.
It's a potting mix, but it's your go-to.
Yeah,
So
well, and like now, we have a garden soil mix of this that has the same core ingredients, coco coir, leaf mold compost. It doesn't have the perlite. It has a little bit of the expanded shell in it. It has a different type of sand. So different ingredients, but the primary sources of that soil are almost identical. They probably started out in the same pile of compost, and then they're amended slightly different for their purpose. So, and it kind of goes to show you like one base of something can be altered and amended to do many things.
Question. You said the gardener's magic that you sell a lot of, that shouldn't be used as the pot. It should be added to something?
No, you can use it solely. I have raised beds out here. I have one raised bed out here in the back that only has gardener's magic, and the one next to it has that garden soil, not the potting soil mix. And they both do well. But I will say the better quality one, the garden performed better in year one than the other one, just strictly based upon particle size, moisture holding capabilities. But now that the gardener's magic has had time to age and get a little better, it does really well, almost equally as well as the other one. So it kind of just goes like, not some soils take a little longer to acclimate, and I'm going to get into that coming up. So just to kind of go through these, you know, peat moss holds moisture, but it lacks a lot of nutrient, like some of the other amendments that you have. Coco coir, renewable, a better alternative for Southeast Texas climate instead of peat moss. You can always add perlite to improve drainage. Vermiculite's going to help you hold water. One I don't have up here, I like expanded shell because it does both. This is essentially like a little volcanic rock, and it was popped like popcorn. So if we look at it under a microscope, it has tiny pores. It's going to hold a little bit of moisture, but at the same time, this guy is going to keep clay and hard particles from bonding together and improve my drainage. And unlike vermiculite and perlite, I can't make this disintegrate with my fingertips. You know, it's essentially like a pebble. It will be here for a very, very long time. Most likely I'll be dead, and this little rock will still be here. Then compost. Compost is how we're going to keep soil life active and going by adding that season after season. So one of the things that we find when we're dealing with soil, and this is an example I like to give, when we're starting gardens, or let's say we're adding on to gardens, you know, this is where we find people, they cut corners with soil. They want to spend the least amount of money on soil because soil is expensive and we need lots of it to fill a raised bed. But what ends up happening is that those people that they take the cheap alternative, they have very, very poor success. They spend tons more money trying to get their soil right so they can actually accomplish something, and at least 50% of them quit before they ever have the first successful season. And it all starts with the thing that they didn't want to spend the money on. You could buy the crummiest looking plants that look like they're near death and put them in a good quality soil, and there's a very high chance they're going to turn around and turn out to be very resilient plants versus getting expensive, nice looking plants and putting them in really crummy dirt. They're not going to do well. So one of the greatest examples of this is starting a raised bed. If we start a 4x8 raised bed, we need, and it's 1.5 feet tall, I need 48 cubic feet of soil to fill that up. So that's the equivalent of 32 bags of Gardener's Magic. So it's a lot of money. Now I could go travel around and I could get a scoop of gardening mix from somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I can get that scoop of gardening mix for a third of the price. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to put it in, I'm going to plant my plants, and then my plants are going to start seeing issues. They're going to start getting yellowing, stunted growth. They're going to just kind of be sitting there and you're going to be wondering, what is wrong? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And you're trying everything you can think of, and it's not your fault. It's the soil. And that leads because a lot of bulk soils, depending on like inexpensive bulk soils, there's nothing wrong with them. People don't plan far enough in advance. They have what we call nitrogen immobilization. So basically those soils have not been composted enough. There's too much stuff like this in it, like big, thick, and sometimes thicker than this. This is a nice shredded mulch that's going to break down pretty easily. But if we have too much large organic matter in there, all the nitrogen that was in that soil is going to be robbed or tied up, decomposing these bigger particles. And then our plant, which is kind of the inferior thing in the soil, there's less plants versus more organic matter trying to break down. All that nitrogen is going to be used up trying to decompose these organic matter, and our plants are going to suffer and they're going to stunt. So if you go and you get bulk soil, you need to plan ahead, 4 to 6 months ahead, because that's how much longer that soil really probably needed to compost, depending on where it came from and their composting practices. I've done bulk soil before. There's no issue with it, but I learned really quickly that we need to let it age. I'll get it delivered, I'll have it dropped in a pile, and I'll just let it sit there. If I can turn it over, I may come back and I'll start fertilizing it, amending it, making sure that I'm putting nutrients into it, because it is a living thing, and I know it's using up things that my plants are going to need. So if you do get bulk soil, always be mindful that that can be an issue depending on the quality of it. And, look at it, put your hands in it, see what kind of texture it has. If it's not a really, really fine texture and have a lot of like fine particles, it might not be ready to plant in. And that's a lot of times you'll find people will spend more money buying bulk soil trying to grow a garden than if they would have just bought the bag stuff that is composted and ready. And I don't ever say that as a sales pitch. It's just a mistake that I see about 1,000 times a year. And then people are so frustrated because they pumped growing a garden ain't cheap. And so getting it right the first time will make you much happier.
We did that. How do we fix it?
It really just comes into amending. Top dressing with compost, feeding it, keeping whenever you're out of season. I'll give you a tip here in a bit so I don't get ahead of myself and off track. There's some things that you can do to help keep the soil going.
So we did both. When we were first making our beds, like pulling up the grass and trying to get a bunch of dirt in there, we got a big scoop.
Yeah.
But then, like when we started planting, we were using bag soils to like plant around the plants, and maybe that's what.
Yeah, and so your plant gets this false sense of security because like they have they have this good soil they're in, and when they finally get big and they start branching out, well, you think like the bigger the plant gets, the more resources it needs because it has a lot more mass to support, or it has fruit and flowers and seeds to basically support. And then whenever those roots start getting out into that soil that might be nitrogen deficient, or the nitrogen is immobilized, then it's like, what do I do? Like, there's nothing here for me. And then they go into fight or flight mode and they just kind of sit there. So again, it's not that the soil is bad. It's just having a realization that it wasn't ready. And fixing it, fertilization, slow release fertilizer, making sure you're consistently putting nitrogen in there. When you're planting in there, supplementing that's where when you're fighting nitrogen deficiency, fish emulsion or liquid nitrogen sources that can go directly on your plant as a foliar spray or a soil drench can really help give that boost of nutrients that might be missing there. And over time, adding compost, fertilizer, and slow release sources, you're going to get it built up. And as that soil ages, that problem's going to go away. and it's going to hold nutrients better. But it's not there's no overnight fix to those issues. You could go and get like a synthetic nitrogen, and it's going to give your plants a really, really fast sprig of nitrogen, but as it washes away, then there's no more left, and you have to continually doing that like every 4 to 6 weeks. So it's kind of a Band-Aid approach, but you've got to get it built up in there. And the best way to do it, keep adding good stuff on top. Keep adding compost, and then add in, a quality natural fertilizer. Which that pretty much is this slide answering your questions. So building better soil, add compost yearly, ideally twice a year. As particles break down, if you've had a raised bed, you notice after a season or a year, it's like, where did all the soil go? It's breaking down, it's living. So adding compost on top is an easy way to keep it active and healthy. Mulch has its place. Mulch is the beginning of soil. Mulch is not an aesthetic component like most people think. Yes, it looks nice. No, we don't want colored mulches in the garden, but we want a shredded mulch like this where there's no large particles. Sometimes you'll get some big pieces that make it through a screener, but you don't want like big, flaky, flat pieces of mulch. If you've ever bought mulch from like the big box store, like the really cheap mulch, and you notice they have just like lots of flat pieces of wood, some of those are like post-construction materials. It can be all kinds of things, but they're not processed and small enough so they actually do the same thing that non-ready garden soil does. It immobilizes nitrogen, and it makes your plants really suffer and stress, although they're more hardy than, say, a tender vegetable. So we want like a shredded, composted mulch. When I'm doing mulch in the garden, I like to make sure I'm using a composted mulch, because when I open it up, I want to see fines, like in this Gardener's Magic, how I'm seeing like little, like almost like soil in here. I want to see that in my mulch, because I know that mulch is not going to be robbing away nitrogen. It's at a stage that will benefit my soil and my plants. It's going to help keep moisture consistent, which is the number one thing we need mulch for, regulation of moisture. And then it's also going to regulate temperature. So it's kind of like it's like a blanket in the winter, keeping the soil warm, and it's also keeping the soil temperature cooler in the summer months when it gets really hot. So better soil temperature regulation makes microbes and moisture more consistent, which is, it's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, consistency. Another aspect you can do, great option for mulch in a garden, pine straw. This is my personal favorite. If you got pine trees, rake this stuff up and fluff it up in there. Use it to your benefit. If you don't, you can buy it. It's cheaper than mulch. The 1 bale of pine straw is the equivalent to 10 bags of mulch. I buy 1 bale, and I have like 1 bale for each garden that I have, because I have one here at the office, one at home. I usually buy 1 bale, maybe 1 to 2 bales a year. So it's not a whole lot. Fluffs up really good for gardening whenever I'm dealing with things that don't like wet leaves, like cucumbers, squash, melons. It's easy for me to stick my hose nozzle in here and get it down to the soil and flood my beds to keep dirt from splashing up onto sensitive plants like tomatoes that might get diseased, that start in the soil. Just a great option. Breaks down just like any other mulch, feeds the soil. Reducing, yeah, we do. It's like,
Going to Silsby.
like at Southern, Southern Issues, yeah. The same exact stuff. We sell the rolls. Some people have like the bags that are like plastic bags that look like a bale of shavings. Those are primarily produced for like big box stores. So it's cheaper for us to get the rolls, which are a little bit bigger. But we typically always have them. We buy 200 or 300 at a time.
I've lived here most all my life. I didn't know y'all sold gardening things. I thought it was a feed store like for pigs and cows.
To be honest with you, if I could change my name today, and it not be an upright riot, I probably would. But it's a hard bullet to bite. But we are primarily like nowadays known for like gardening and plants and stuff like that. I mean, we do backyard chickens and small livestock and stuff. But I mean, I'm in the middle of Nederland now, you know, I'm in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
We don't get a lot of requests for a lot of like, you know, farm type stuff. I have some loyal customers that still come all the way over here, you know, but a lot of the bigger like farm and feed stores are on the outskirts of town now. But this is what we love, all of us, like lawn and garden, you know, that's what my primary goal is nowadays. So, tilling is always a sore subject for some people. Some people think it's an absolute necessity. I think it is absolutely not a necessity, because when we talk about microbes, and I mentioned earlier about mycelium creating a web in the soil, if I throw a tiller in there and I turn it over, what's going to happen to all that web that we've created of like living things in the soil? We're disrupting it, we're damaging it, we're killing it, destroying it. Tilling is not necessary. If we're putting good components into our soil and being mindful about what we're adding and we're creating good soil structure, tilling is not necessary. Adding compost on top is going to help maintain soil structure. And if we look at all the things I'm telling you today, and we observe season after season what our soil is doing, how it feels, looks, and performs, then we will learn how to alter it over time by experimentation. And then we won't need to do this. And our soil will stay healthier. It'll stay more nutrient rich. One of the things you're talking about, nitrogen deficiency. So not every gardener wants to plant things year round. We are lucky to live in an area where we only have 3 seasons. There is no such thing as a cold season in Southeast Texas and the world of gardening. We have cool season, we have warm season, hot season, and warm season again. Our cold season is like the equivalent of a week long. You know, if we really got in, it's spread out and it's sparse. So we can theoretically be growing something 12 months out of the year. So keeping something in your soil growing at all times is important. But if there's a season where it's something that you don't want to grow and it's just not worth your time and effort, maybe you don't like to winter garden, putting a cover crop, especially in the wintertime. Crimson clover is a very beautiful flowering red clover, grows tall. It's a nitrogen affixer. So what happens, it pulls nitrogen out of the air, it stores them in little nodes in the root system, and then when that plant dies, you can essentially just cut it off, kind of what they call the chop and drop method. You cut it, drop it back into the soil, that root system begins to die, and bacteria helps break down those nitrogen nodes and release it back into the soil. You can accomplish the same thing during the summer. Even if you're not a fan of black-eyed peas or purple hull peas, you don't like them, growing southern peas or any other legume for that matter does the same thing. It affixes nitrogen out of the atmosphere. You harvest what you want if you do. When you're done, cut it off at the base, let the root system die. You're feeding nitrogen back into the soil. So there's ways that you can do that, not just by adding additives, you can do it with plants. So always having something growing is vital to keep your soil living and healthy. And if you do that, you're going to encourage soil biology. So always thinking about, and nowadays you can find the answer to anything, within seconds. If you're thinking about adding something to your soil and you're not sure, simply get online and ask the pros and cons of what I'm about to put in there. And then think about it before you throw it in. Because there's all kinds of things that can happen that you might not think of when you're putting something into the soil. So we always want to make sure, is this going to support what I'm actually going for? And are there more pros than cons? I mean, everything has a con, so there's always been a negative to anything we put in to the soil, but do the pros outweigh the cons? Kind of my final takeaway today, if I haven't said it enough, be very soil focused. Great gardens start with healthy soil. They don't start with anything else. Living soil, most importantly, the garden soil that we have, like the veggie and herb, like this potting mix, these are actually microbially inoculated. There's microbes in here. They actually measure and make sure that there is a viable amount of living, life in these soils. Not enough to say that none of the others don't have anything, but this is cultivated with mycorrhizal and other good things that we want in our soil. So we're starting off with something really good right out of the gate.
And that one would be good for letting in, I'm sorry. Like
The veggie and herb is what we use like in ground use.
Okay.
That's the potting mix if I'm using it like in
That's
a
what I was
container.
focus on, in
Yeah.
a container.
Yeah, the container, the potting mix. And now the veggie and herb, you can use it in a container all day long. I do it all the time. It does just fine. In the coming like 2 months, I will be doing, I have right now on my driveway, annoying my wife immensely because I have 8 pots lining the driveway with tomatoes in them, using 8 different soils, from the cheapest potting soil I sell to the most high-end potting soil that we have. Watching how they're growing and seeing like, so I'll be doing a lot of content just talking about like what's making this one do better than this one, because at the end of the day none of them are bad, just some contain better things than others, some are more balanced than others. So I'll be able to really give you guys like a deep dive into what makes something work and what doesn't. Nutrients. You know, if you're going to take the time to feed, do so by making sure you have slow release nutrients and make sure that it supports microbial life. You know, some of your decent fertilizers out there now are going to have molasses and humic acids in them. Those are things that will help create soil structure that are going to help feed microbes. Microbes feed on sugar. So like Microlife is always my go-to. The Nelson plant food is awesome as well, but this has blackstrap molasses in these pellets, so it has something in there to help feed these microbes and get cultivated. When you put this out, water it in, within 24 hours there'll be mold growing on the top of it because it's activating that fast. There's so many billions of species, or not species, but microbes in there. And that's what you want. You want to be cultivating that stuff. And at the end of the day, finally, like drainage, just making sure, observe your soil, spend more time watching, seeing what's working and what's not, watching how, you know, when I talk about drainage, it's not so much is it draining through really quickly, but like how long between waterings can you go without your plants wilting or being stressed or looking like nothing's happening or yellowing? I just watered my home garden for the first time in a week. I made it a week without doing anything. And I even had some young plants in there that I just transplanted last weekend. Now we're almost to this weekend. And I went probably 5 days without watering from the first time. But I stuck my hand in the dirt. Was it damp deep down? Just because the top layer of soil is dry doesn't mean we need to water. So regulating our watering will help us make sure nutrients are more readily available. Because if we're overwatering, we're gonna saturate the soil. We're gonna get root rot and other problems, nutrient deficiencies. Though that's really, especially in container growing or raised beds, the fastest way to get yellowing or kind of sad-looking plants because we're washing out our nutrients and there's just not enough of them there. So it's just finding balance. There is no like magic formula. Everybody's space is going to be different. My home garden is grown mostly in shade. Water holds much longer. The one out here in the back gets beat on by the sun from sun up to sundown. I have to water twice as much, sometimes 3 times as much in the summer than I would at home because I don't have that natural filtration of sun. So there's ways that you can help your soil regulate some of these things. Like back here this year, we're putting up shade cloth. It's been on my to-do list for a year. It's happening this year. We're going to put up a shade cloth that we're going to drag across the garden in the summer because it will reduce nutrient uptake being wasted by plants. It's going to reduce the watering just simply by providing a little bit of relief. You know, I always tell people if it's uncomfortable for you out there, it's probably uncomfortable for your plant too. That's pretty much my spiel. If you got something of value out of here, we post YouTube stuff all week. Me and Aaron Barnhill have a podcast we do weekly, talking about everything and anything gardening. This week we're talking about goats. So neither of us knew anything about goats. So I got to get schooled on goats. So I'm super excited about that release this week. And yeah, I'm always putting up stuff, and you can find all these classes. If you can't come to them, they're all streamed. You can watch the recordings from any of the old ones online.
I saw the pop-up them at 10 o'clock. I'm like, don't watch it.
They're
Go to
only,
the class.
honestly, like I put them both up there because sometimes like I think of something that I forgot about. So
For sure.
there's always something different in
I
each
wanted
one.
to actually come first, and
Yeah,
then I go
yeah.
into later if I want to. Yeah.
So as we wrap up today, has anybody got any questions? It doesn't have to be specifically about this topic, but you got any questions?
Is there any quick tip for weeds in your flower bed?
Depends on the type of weed first and foremost, but what I tell people when it comes to weeds, like there's a couple things that weeds can teach you, and they're going to teach you about this topic here. They're going to teach you about your soil. First and foremost, when you're looking at a flower bed, when you pull up those weeds, get you a trowel or a shovel, dig it up, and look at the root structure. Okay, most of the time in a flower bed, you're going to get one of two types of roots. You're going to get something with a long taproot. If you see primarily things with taproots that are going straight down, they may have some lateral roots out, but taproots mean that you have soil compaction. So it means that we're not getting enough air, water, and oxygen evenly. We don't have the right mixture of components that we talked about. Nutgrass is really, really common in landscape beds.
What's nutgrass?
Nutgrass is like the bane of any landscaper's existence. It's a little grass that pops up. You could pull it out, and then in 3 days it's back. It grows rapidly. It puts on what looks like a little peanut, and it thrives in water. It can grow in drier environments, but areas that hold more moisture, it will thrive in. So when you find areas that are really, really overrun with it in a landscape bed, even in a raised bed, oftentimes your moisture content is too high. You need a little better drainage. So improving drainage sometimes can be helpful if you've got a lot of taproots. Adding compost on top will help. Thick layers of mulch, if it's a mulch bed, keeping that mulch consistent. Most people in a landscape bed or a flower bed, mulch is a once a year thing. Mulch is a 2 time a year thing at minimum. You don't need to like fully remulch, but you've got to top it off because it's living, it's breaking down. So if it's breaking down and we don't have that larger texture to shield and keep the moisture and the temperature regulated, then we're going to make more favorable environments for weeds. Mulch also helps some weeds not be able to sprout because it's porous. Certain weeds need very good soil to seed contact in order to germinate. So stuff like this sometimes will disrupt weed growth just because it can't germinate.
Pine needles too.
What's that?
The pine needles too.
Yeah, they can definitely help. I have one client in my landscape company. We do pine needles, and it looks really nice too. It's very good at suppressing weeds. I find that, like, to me, it's really good at suppressing a lot of things because it's very airy. There's no soil to this. When it breaks down, it's not going to be like soil-like at first. So it's really hard for something to germinate in this. Now, on the other hand, if you pull up something and it has a very fibrous root system and a lot of dirt is sticking to that root system, then your soil might be too loose. It's holding it in, preventing erosion and preventing washout. And you can sometimes be in the middle of those things, but a lot of times I like to look at the first thing is what does the root system tell you, and start from there, and then focus on with anything. I do this with my lawn customers because it's a very similar situation. People want a weed-free lawn. They don't want these unwanted plants in there, but they're growing there for a reason. It might be mineral deficiencies, might be nutrient deficiencies. The common dandelion will thrive in calcium deficient soils. So if we have more minerals or nutrients, dandelion might not thrive there. So fertilizing organically can help. Putting trace minerals out. There's a product called azomite that I highly recommend. It can go anywhere. It can go in your raised beds, can go in your flower beds. It puts trace minerals and minor nutrients back out there that can help the soil be healthier and be more abundant. It's just kind of a combination of things. But first, pull them up and see. Most of the time, it's a soil-based problem. It's just experimentation because everybody's different, If I have somebody, their gutters running out into their raised bed, 9 times out of 10, it's just compacted and it's too wet. The water's not moving out fast enough. So there's little things like that. Look at the environment and think about, okay, if it's really wet here, how's this water getting here and why is it staying here? And a lot of times elemental or things that we just have in our environment that we don't think are related. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Might be a bit much, but
No, that's
yeah.
great.
What else?
You ever have to remove old pine needles? All right, cool.
I just like I just let them go, you know, because they will get really, really fine. They're gonna get kind of white and gray because they're breaking down. As anything, you know, they lose their color. You know, mulch eventually turns whitish gray because, you know, it loses its natural pigments, and as it breaks down, it just happens. But no, I just let it go, and I top it off, and eventually, like if I'm in the beginning of the year, before I put my new mulch, I'm always putting compost down, so I'm covering up those little smaller broken down pieces that are left with my compost, adding my fertilizer in, and then I'm putting more pine straw down, and it tends to do really well.
It just kind of piggybacks on what he's saying, but as for a container, so if I'm doing my veggie herbs like tomatoes and herbs and marigolds and stuff in there, do I need, besides the potting mix you're telling me about, do I need to do either which kind of mulch? Should I put mulch on top of it?
You could put, I've done both.
Both?
I've done
Either?
regular like composted mulch.
Okay.
Pine straw works well. You know, because the same thing, especially in a container, soil temperature and moisture regulation are much more difficult.
Right.
You know, a pot doesn't have the native soil around it to keep it cooler or keep it warmer in the winter, so it's going to be a lot different from in the ground or in a raised bed where there's a bigger mass of soil to hold that.
Yeah.
So this can keep that top layer in a pot from drying out as fast. So pine straw is easy. I always like it, especially in a container, because if I need to add something, I can just grab it, put it off to the side, make my amendments, put it right back. You know, it's super easy.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I don't know if I can ask this, how to ask this question. So, what about rocks that have been used for mulch?
You talk like ground cover, like in a bed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with using rocks, but you have to be mindful of what's going in there. Not every plant can survive with a rock like ground cover. Some plants can't handle the radiant heat. It's going to increase your soil temperature. Most of the time when you have rocks in a landscape, you're going to have fabric over the top of it to keep the rock from sinking into the soil, and then it will exponentially make weed problems worse. Fabric makes moisture more difficult to go through. It makes fertilizing a little bit more difficult. So there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to make sure that you're choosing your plant selection wisely. And if you're not, and if you aren't, you know, you just have to be mindful that it's going to be more difficult. I mean, I face this a lot because I install landscaping for a living, and rocks, or people love rocks. They think that they're going to be weed free. They will not be weed free forever, but I have them in my front yard around my garden because grass wouldn't grow in the area where we designed our garden, and leaves fall in them. Leaves break down and turn to detritus material, then they turn into soil, and then when there's soil in between all the gaps of the rocks, then the weeds come. So eventually, after many years, I'll have to pull the rocks back, clean it out, and put them back. You know, it's not a carefree type situation, but landscape plants, I like to use mostly like native or more well drought tolerant acclimated plants that can handle heat when I'm doing a rockscape, just because it'll be a lot easier to deal with.
So you wouldn't try some of these things about amending the soil or doing things? I mean, obviously, you'd have to pull the rocks back and put it back on top.
So when you're dealing with rocks or something like that, you can use dry fertilizer using it around the plants and whatnot. And you could sprinkle it over the top of rocks because moisture is going to break down, but without that soil contact with like dry fertilizer, it's not going to give you the same benefit. So most of the time your plants were planted in, you know, and cut out around fabric. You know, you can shake it around the base. But that's where like using liquids will be more useful because liquids are instantaneous. Liquids will go through that permeable fabric. You could spray it on the foliage and they can get minerals, fertilizer, and nutrients. But this has to be done more regularly to get the same aspect of this. There are things in you can find liquid humic acids which will help populate microbes. There are water-soluble microbes that you can get where you could essentially mix this to introduce it into your soil without having to do it in a dry form. So there are ways around it. They're just less common.
Your shoe is uncut, so don't fall.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Roundup.
Not a fan of it. Number one, Roundup is carcinogenic. It definitely disrupts your plants. It definitely damages your soil. Excessive use of it, and when you stress out plants and soil, then that's when weeds come in, because what you want can't handle the stressful or nutrient deficient areas that you have. In garden use, like vegetable garden use, if we need like weed killer, we only use high concentration vinegar. Vinegar is natural. It will kill anything that it touches. It does not leave a long residual, but it will scorch something. Like 30% vinegar, fairly inexpensive. If you're not spraying mass amounts of weed killer, it's a great alternative, and it's eco-friendly. That's what we'll use. There are some other organic weed killers out there, like Miramichi, that you can find online that are okay for using around edibles and landscape that are far less detrimental. They're naturally occurring substances. If I had to use Roundup as an alternative, there's other things out there that I could dive into, but that's one that's on my no-fly list. And I am a landscaper, so we do have to use it for some commercial clients, but like some of the people that I work with over the years, I probably use like 1/10 of what they use in a year, because it's not something we don't age with it, we don't use it, because we're really focused on trying to create healthy soil in our beds, especially with landscape maintenance, yards, because it makes a big difference in how soil stays like we want it.
Quick question, which is kind of off of that. What I'm concerned about on the container gardens, like if I do tomatoes and things in there, what I don't want them to do is put too much. So how do I know? I know you got to put a bit, but like how do you know where the edge is between I didn't put enough plants in there as opposed to I'm crowding it and killing all my nutrients in my soil?
I mean, it just depends on
So,
you just have to understand the size of the plant,
okay.
Just for instance, this is the minimum bucket size for one tomato.
Okay.
I mean, now
Just
my experiment that I'm doing at home, I'm breaking my rule here. We're using something like this because I'm looking at the soil. I'm not really worried about whether it produces a whole lot. It's a soil experiment, so we're going to give it a little bit of stress to throw in to see which ones perform. But ideally, that smaller bucket's great for a pepper,
Okay.
one pepper. So now if I were doing like say fall lettuce or something small, I could put 7-8 lettuce plants in there.
Oh, okay.
So some things you can crowd up, and at the same time too, your practices and my practices and the way I do things might be different. You have to experiment. I encourage people, plant one bucket one way.
Right.
If you have the ability to do another one, or you have multiple, do something different and see how the results compare. If you do, I love to crowd things. I love to challenge spacing. My beds are like a very cottagey feel. They're full. They're flowing out the beds. Sometimes I have tomatoes growing into the walkway. I don't care. I let it go wild in a sense.
Yes.
But when I have things that crowded, I understand I'm going to have to water more, and I'm going to definitely have to feed more if I want to get the same production. Because when you plant tightly, then yes, there is competition for water and nutrients, but knowing that, I know I have to supply more.
Got it.
So,
Okay. Thank you. That
Yeah.
answered exactly what I needed. Thanks.
anything else?
That's it. Pretty good.
Awesome.
We appreciate your time.
No problem. I forgot to tell the last people that are on the desk back there. There is like hundreds and hundreds of packets of seeds. Peruse through them, take what you would like. They're free. They're last year's seeds that we can no longer sell. So I won't throw them away. So we just they have to be retested for germination and noxious weeds by Texas state law, and no seed vendor is going to retest packets or like small packs for that matter, or lot numbers. So we have to remove them off the shelf or we can get fined. So we buy new seeds every year. Packs are bulk seeds that we do. We get new stuff every year, just to make sure we keep up with it. And so yeah, we donate them. Donate a lot of the bulk stuff to like school teachers and stuff like that for, you know, people that are doing lots of stuff, and then all the other stuff just gets given away here. So awesome. Appreciate y'all's time today.
Thank you.
Yeah.